Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to answer a question, which is, why are leaders today unable to correct course? I want to develop today's podcast in 3 steps. First, I want to give 3 examples of major failings today of world leaders. In step 2, I want to give, as far as I can see, 3 necessary conditions, and they are built onto each other. 3 conditions that 3 necessary conditions for leaders to be able to correct course. And finally, I want to dissect the reality today, and I want to point out the distance between reality and the necessary conditions for leaders to be able to correct course. Now, to begin with, let's talk about 3 examples, and I want to cover them very briefly. The first one is the energy crisis in the European Union, particularly, and in fact also in Britain, which has left the EU. The energy crisis is man-made. It is the result of an energy mix, an energy strategy that involves a lot of hope and expectations and not a lot of understanding of realities. Had they not faced with the conflict, the military conflict in Eastern Europe this year, they would have hit the wall somewhere in the near future. Nevertheless, they would have hit the wall because there simply aren't enough minerals to help them fulfill their dream of battery-based future. There aren't enough batteries, and in fact, the energy, that the fossil fuel that is needed to process all those polluting heavy metals to make those batteries to power their future is also quite astounding. This is a strategy that is completely nonsensical. Compound that with the self-inflicting wound this year of certain sanctions, unilateral sanctions, and hopes of regime change in certain Eastern European nation, has resulted in the energy crisis that has seen energy bills in certain Central and Northern European countries to reach levels that basically make a lot of people who have been wage earners and have been leading what one could possibly describe as a decent standard of living, to basically fall into poverty. That is the first example. The second example is, of course, the money printing and politicization of everything in the United States. We have seen a lot of doubling downs by the Biden-Harris regime, which has focused in basically winning power and keeping power above all else at the expense of the U.S. economic strength, at the expense of the U.S. strategic resources, and at the expense of U.S. energy dependency, and most importantly, at the expense of the credibility of the U.S. dollar, which in my judgment is the sole source of the power that the U.S. still has. Why are they doing that? Why can't they correct course, right? And finally, we have the zero virus policy from certain East Asian country. I'm not going to develop on that too much. I think people who have been mildly aware of current events are somewhat puzzled by this, and they wonder why is it that the leaders are not able to correct course, even though the new information has arisen, even though the circumstances have changed. Now let's move on to the second step, or the second part of today's podcast, where I discuss the 3 necessary conditions. And in fact, these are conditions that build on each other. The first condition is that the leaders must be smart. The leaders must be able to understand the situation. They must not be someone who just somehow who is born into power, or someone who is gifted the power, but at the same time is unable to understand where this person, he or she, derives the power, and is unable to understand the nuances in the society, and is unable to understand the economic situation, and is unable to understand, in this case of the EU, the energy situation, the science behind all these various technologies. If you are unable to understand, if a leader is unable to understand these issues, then it is very difficult, near impossible, for this leader to realize that he or she is wrong, or that the policy that the government has pursued is wrong. Being unable to know, being unaware of the mistakes, of course, it is impossible for the person to correct course, to make amends. And the second necessary condition is that the leader needs to be informed. That means that the leader must have people around him or her that is able to point out the leader's mistakes. If the leader is surrounded by yes men, if the leader is surrounded by a hierarchy of bureaucrats who are only there to serve the leader, then it is very unlikely for the leader to obtain realistic information on the ground, so that we could arrive at the time when at a situation where even though the leader given correct information will be able to understand that he or she is mistaken, and that a course correction is needed, simply because information is not able to arrive to him or her, the person is unable to really realize the situation. And even when he perhaps understands from a scientific or technical basis that there may be some problems when he or she goes out to gather the information in order to make a better judgment and in order to make the best corrections of course correction, it is virtually impossible for this person to really achieve that. And that is why some leaders will not be able to correct course. And finally, it is also very important for the leader to be secure. Basically, that means that the leader, knowing that he has committed mistake, must be secure, politically secure enough, must be confident enough that he or she is able to admit that there has been some mistakes and that a course correction is needed, and that this person has the political will in order to execute these type of corrections. Now, finally, let's move on to the last part of today's podcast, which is the reality. As I have suggested, the reality is quite far from satisfying these three conditions. First, when it comes to the quality of the leaders, we can see that in a lot of places we have downright stupid leaders who reach their positions because of their connections, because they have rich parents, they have powerful parents, or other family members, or they married the correct person, or they married into some aristocratic family, and as a result, these people are not really able to understand the various issues that need to be understood for him or her to realize that there are some mistakes that needs to be addressed. Secondly, when it comes to the path of information, we are seeing that a lot of the leaders today are increasingly isolated, or maybe a more precise word is that is insulated in a bubble of, let's say, an exclusive class or upper class or whatever, 1%, 0.1% club. In this group, people think similarly. They socialize with each other. They are all wealthy. They do not appreciate the difficulties that the average people are meeting, have to deal with every day on a daily basis, right? So that is already just the general situation. But then there are a lot of political systems, a lot of hierarchical, bureaucratic political systems in the East and in the West, where the leader is indeed surrounded by yes men. In this situation, under such circumstances, the leader simply gets an echo of what his subordinates think that the leader is thinking or want to hear. And as a result, there is no effective reflection of reality on the ground. That makes it very difficult for leaders to really appreciate the difficulties in the real economy, in the real societies, in by the dinner table, in people's families, in the families of working people. That basically causes an alienation and for the leader, perhaps everything has been rosy, and perhaps this is, of course, a great reason why a lot of leaders cannot make changes to the policies. And finally, there is also a collapse of political goodwill in the across the economies, across major economies. The leaders are afraid of the people. Some leaders are wise enough. They also, perhaps even though they get surrounded by a lot of yes men, they still, with the help of sensors, or perhaps with the help of modern technology, get a sense of the difficulties on the ground, the difficulties that the working people, the working men and women are feeling. But they are too afraid of acknowledging their mistakes. They are too afraid of the consequences, that the repercussions that they will face from the public, but not just from the public, but also from the political class. Because if they are to acknowledge that there is a mistake and that they need to change the policies, a lot of the interests that established interests would fight against such course change. And these vested interests are found in the political class, and they are powerful. When a leader gets perhaps gets to antagonize not just to antagonize, let's say, a lot of the vested interest in the political class, or at the same time face a weakening support among the populace, actually the position of the leader is threatened. And we have seen some politicians really, being very skittish about, maybe it's not skittish, it's not the correct word, being very, let's say, well, I'm not sure which is the best word, but basically it's a little bit uncomfortable or very, well, let's say skittish. I think this is not the right word, but that's the idea anyway. So this is today's podcast. I hope that you find, some of the discussions interesting. I encourage you, of course, to follow me on Twitter at Dr. Julian Teng, and of course, Telegram. I'll have the link listed in the description below. Thanks, and have a great day.